McBride is an executive in residence at the Center for Congressional and Presidential Studies that's part of the School of Public Affairs at American University in Washington, D.C. In that role, Anita directs programming on America's First Ladies and, most importantly, their historical influence. You'll often see Anita interviewed when questions arise about the role of the First Lady. She also advises on HBO's hit TV series V. Anita previously served as Chief of Staff to First Lady Laura Bush from 2005 to 2008. In that role, she directed work on a variety of domestic and global initiatives that included U.S. foreign policy objectives in human rights, women's empowerment, global health, and also human freedom. Anita directed Mrs. Bush's travel to 67 countries in 4 years, and that included historic visits to Afghanistan, the Middle East, and the Thai-Burma border. Anita McBride's White House service has spanned 2 decades and 3 presidential administrations, including not only George W. Bush, but also serving as Director of White House Personnel under Presidents Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. We have much to discuss today. Anita, welcome to She Said, She Said.
Oh, thank you so much, Laura. I'm excited to talk to you today.
I'm so happy to have you here. I think one of the biggest challenges I had in putting together my thoughts on this interview was where to start, because we could talk about so many topics. Let's start, though, with your current role at American University and the First Ladies Initiative. What is that?
Sure. Terrific way to start, and thank you, because it was the beginning of a new chapter in my career and my time here in Washington. After the Bush administration was over in January of 2009, and I think a lot of us were thinking about what comes next, and in addition to being very tired and barely able to put one foot in front of the other, I took a little time to regroup and really identify what it is that I enjoy doing. And I was approached by the then president of American University, Neil Kerwin. Actually, he came to meet with me while I was still in the White House just to gauge my interest in an idea that he had for the university, which was watching with growing interest the influence of recent first ladies on our domestic politics and policy and global diplomacy, and whether I would be interested in starting a program at AU, because AU does have such a long history of hosting American first ladies dating back to Eleanor Roosevelt. So I thought, well, that's something that I could do, having a front row seat to watching Laura Bush, but also having the experience of working in the Reagan and Bush 41 administration. I developed a program at his request through the Center for Congressional and Presidential Studies, which is a perfect place to put it because it does add to the dialogue around this role that it is a partnership to the presidency. So we started developing a series of conferences around the country in partnership with presidential libraries, which was a perfect way to do this. And we also partnered with the White House Historical Association, where I am on the board there now as well. So tapping into those resources. We've done 7 conferences around the country. I also do a number of lectures, a number of guest lectures for other professors at AU. And we look at the role of First Lady as a woman leader in our country and throughout our whole history, which was fun.
Yeah. Why is that important? Why is it important to understand the role that she played? Well, so far we're going to talk about what happens if it might be
because it could change.
Yeah.
So the role of a partner to the presidency, in this case it's the First Lady, but it's truly any political spouse. But in this case, throughout our history, if we truly want to understand our history, and I think that is so important for all of our children in our country to understand the fundamentals of our founding, who all the players were. And starting at the very beginning with the Martha Washington, with Dolly Madison, with Abigail Adams, they were so integral to our liberty and our democracy. They are part of our history, and we should know our history. So that's why it's important to study them.
So, as you said yourself, you've had an opportunity to see this role up close and personal, and you've worked not only with former First Lady Laura Bush, but a number of other First Ladies as well. What do you think is most surprising to people when they study the role of the First Lady, or what surprises most people when you talk about your experience?
Sure. I think they're surprised with how much they're engaged in and how multifaceted the role really is. Because let's remember, we have this growing expectation of the position, and it is an automatically powerful platform the minute that the president is sworn in. But it is something that can be considered ill-defined because every single person gets to rewrite the position description the way they want it to be. There's no statutory requirements for it. There's no salary. I think that that sort of lends itself, frankly, I agree with that. I think that they should not be codified through any form of legislation or through a salary or anything, because it will constrain them. But the position, I think people are surprised at just how much it can be rewritten with each person. And they can pick and choose what they want to do. But that they do have this powerful light that they can shine on any issue that they care about. And they bring attention to it.
Recently, our current First Lady, Melania Trump, has rolled out part of her official platform. Some were a bit surprised by her choice of cyberbullying. For the purposes of this discussion, we don't necessarily need to discuss the here nor there of whether that makes sense, but I'm more interested in what the process is for determining what that platform is. So what was your experience as it relates to the development of what the First Lady is going to focus on?
Well, I think that is a great question, and again, sort of adds to your previous question about their role and how they get to define what they want it to be. They're best at it if they choose something that they really care about, because then there is some credibility and authenticity to whatever the First Lady's platform is. And usually that's the best place to start, something that you care about. And I think despite any of the criticisms that she may face about the choice of her first issue, that doesn't diminish the fact that it is something that we all do worry about in our country, and particularly someone who's a mother of young children. We're all focused on that. We see how our kids are impacted by social media, and they're never able to turn it off. And also how what sometimes is said can be very hurtful, and how they're able to deal with that. So it is sort of a life skill that we worry about for all of our kids, and I'm actually glad she's shining a light on it. Despite what else may be coming out of the Oval Office, it's still an important issue, so that shouldn't stop her from taking it on.
Let's talk a bit about the evolution of the role itself.
Sure.
What are the most significant ways in which it's changed and is continuing to change?
Well, I think one of the major things that has changed is, and all of us face this, is a growing and intrusive media and a 24-hour news cycle. There is really no way for anyone in public life to ever turn it off. Being able to create sort of a private life around a public figure is much more difficult. And you think about how in some of our history, like Jackie Kennedy, for example, people were fascinated by this young, iconic, beautiful First Lady.
And mom.
And young mother. But she was able to really live a part of a private life all the time away from the White House, riding horses in Middleburg or wherever that she was doing, without the scrutiny of a media in the way that it is so intrusive now. And the questioning, including Mrs. Trump, who just recently has been out of the limelight, of course, after having her surgery. So there's these constant questions. What is she doing? Why is she not in, the certain requirement that we have now? Because we have had very visible First Ladies in recent times. So I think that the media scrutiny is probably one of the newer and more intrusive and more difficult things for anybody in the public eye to manage.
So let's talk about the possibility of, hopefully, we'll see a woman in the Oval Office at some point in the not-so-distant future. That will potentially dramatically change the role of first spouse. So let's talk about what that role might look like under that scenario.
Well, we got pretty close. You know, in 2008, it was a possibility. In 2016, it was a possibility when Hillary Clinton ran both those times, and there was some speculation about that at that point. Of course, there was an added layer of complication had Bill Clinton become the presidential spouse, because he was already a president of the United States. So there's a whole infrastructure that comes around that for a former president, and also his foundation and work that he was deeply engaged in, and what would happen to those things. So we faced some of those questions. I'm a big believer in that any occupant of the White House adapts to the White House, but also the White House adapts to the occupant, and that the role may change or have a metamorphosis, but it would still provide the same opportunities should they choose to use the platform. So maybe there might be a different staff structure around a male first spouse in terms of some of the social office responsibilities or requirements. But I've also known presidents who've been deeply involved in the planning of state dinners. George H.W. Bush was very involved in those kinds of things as president. So I think that we need to be careful to not stereotype a man coming into that job. They may embrace all of the diplomatic requirements and the social requirements that come with it. I think the big question will be, if they've had a job or a career before becoming the spouse of the President of the United States, will they want to continue that? And I think they may want to, and certainly they should try. But I think what they'll find are two things. One, there will be tremendous scrutiny, ethics scrutiny around that, of course, and particularly earning an outside salary, maybe fair or unfair. We'll have to grapple with that. I think the other is that they'll find that there is so much good you can do with the presidential spouse position. It's a very busy job. It's very multifaceted. It changes from one minute to the next. There's so many things and opportunities on your schedule that you might not be able to balance two full-time jobs.
You were privileged to know the late former First Lady Barbara Bush.
Yes.
How will we remember her? We've sadly said goodbye to her just recently.
Right.
How will she be remembered, Anita?
Well, I think, and you know Laura, because you've met her on many times, and Barbara Bush is just such a unique person in our lives and the lives of the country, and any of us who are privileged to know her, because she was just so honest and real, and you knew this is a person who loved her faith and her family and her country, and so adored her husband and the life that they led together, and how privileged she felt to have the opportunity to lead the life that she did. I was always so taken by, no matter what she had experienced in all of her years with George H.W. Bush around the country and around the world, she still was the Barbara Bush who loved gardening, who loved her family, who loved to have people to her home, and who loved to could be, very biting at times with the things that she had to say, but she was willing to share life lessons with you. And I think that was a really wonderful part for any of us that knew her personally. But I think also for the country, she was comfortable in who she was, so comfortable in her skin. And that, I think, for anybody who always feels like they're not doing enough or they're not quite measuring up to expectations, that she allowed you to feel like if you're living a good life, you're good to your family, you're going to be just fine.
You wrote a beautiful piece on her passing and your remembrances of her, which was really lovely. So I urge our listeners to check that out.
Thank you.
I would just say, I didn't have the opportunity to spend as much time with her as you did, but on the few occasions that I did, I was always struck by her ability to make you feel incredibly important. She was very curious about people, asked great questions, and she clearly was really interested in getting to know you, which I think is such an amazing quality.
It is. And for someone who's been in public life for so long and has met hundreds of thousands of people, to be able to connect with each person in a way that they felt like they were the only person that was important at that time. That's a real skill and a talent, but it was genuine with Barbara Bush. And up until the last moment, and her humor too, which I think, is such a gift, no matter what you are facing. But you're absolutely right about that. Her curiosity about you, if you're meeting with her, made you feel very special and very important.
It's a gift, definitely a gift. Let's talk a bit about your work on the HBO hit series, The Veep, that I mentioned in the intro. How did that come about?
That's so fun, right? So this was another thing, again, leaving the White House, and this, you have time to pursue other things. And this sort of came to me through a great friend here in town, Tammy Haddad, and she had been doing some work for HBO already. The writers wanted a bipartisan group of consultants, which was really terrific, and I think has really contributed to the show being as popular as it is, in addition to the incredible talent. I mean, Julia Louis-Dreyfus is just amazing. So thanks to Tammy, who recommended me, and I said, Tammy, I'd be delighted to talk about that. I worked in the White House 3 times, but I never worked for a vice president. But my husband, Tim, did, so I'm as a personal aide to a vice president, so I feel like I can do this. So I had a great conversation with the producers and the creator, Armando Iannucci. He obviously liked some of the thoughts or ideas that I had, and next thing you know, there I was one of the few consultants. There were 3 of us, in addition to Tammy, and it's just been great fun. I will say this, though, in one of the first script that I read, I thought was very funny, and I was there to give technical edits, where would the cars be, where would the flags be, what door gets opened, who sits where, those kinds of things. Not really into the script writing, but I happened to just give my own commentary on the script. Because the language that was used could be quite intense. The F word is dropped quite a bit.
It certainly was not used in the Bush White House.
I said it was never. I never heard it in the Reagan White House or the Bush 41 White House. So I just happened, after I gave all my technical edits, I sent it back and I said, oh, and by the way, we really don't speak that way in the White House. And I got a response back saying, thanks for all the technical edits. This is great. And by the way, we'll write the comedy. And you give us the technical details. I said, okay, I got it. So that was season 1. In seasons that came after that, it's been really fun to be part of the script writing and actually meet with the writers and talk with some of the actors and be on site for some of the filming when they used to film here in Columbia, Maryland. So awesome. It's fun. This is the final season. Yeah. But it's been a great run.
That's fantastic. Anita, in practically every book that's written about First Ladies, there's some discussion about navigating conflict between the East Wing staff, where the First Lady and her staff typically sit, and the West Wing staff. Mm-hmm. What was your experience in the Bush administration?
Well, in the George W. Bush administration, the experience was one where we were fully integrated teams. The East and the West Wing, we worked so well with each other. And there are a couple of reasons for that. Number one, the tone is really set from the top. George W. Bush looked to Laura Bush to be a partner with him in the work that he was engaged in, whether it's domestic education reform, which, of course, as a teacher and librarian, he knew she was extremely experienced in this. He counted on her to be a part of that. And the other, of course, on the global work that he was engaged in and really needed Laura Bush to be his diplomat, to be his face, and traveling out there, supporting PEPFAR, malaria, and all the issues that he was engaged in. But the fundamental is being, one, he set the tone, and the staff all knew that, both the East and West Wing. And the other thing is she also set the tone because she was always very honest in saying, I'm not here for me. I'm here for George and because of George. And the West Wing staff, knowing that too, they appreciated that as well because they're working so hard for the president. So they looked to Laura Bush as being someone that they could count on to help make their lives and jobs a little bit easier too. She traveled so much. She did whatever was asked of her, whether it was political campaigning or if a cabinet officer wanted her to travel with them. We did it. I think, again, the bottom line is that the tone is set by the president. And I do know from having worked there before and studying First Ladies, that was not always the case. Certainly Pat Nixon probably suffered that a great deal. She could have really done so much more for her husband, and she did. The most traveled First Lady in history, 81 countries, more than any other First Lady, but most people don't even know that.
No, I didn't know that.
But her husband's advisors just really, felt that she should not be engaged or it shouldn't be known how much that she was doing or traveling because they felt that it could be perceived negatively by the American people.
Now that really is an area where
that's a total
our views
shift.
have evolved.
Completely a total shift. Betty Ford, too, obviously was at odds with some of the principles of the Ford administration. She supported the ERA. President Ford really didn't. Maybe he did personally, but as a policy, he didn't. And certainly his advisors were very worried that her promoting the ERA would hurt him with voters. So it really has evolved so much. But again, bottom line, it's the tone that's set by the person at the top.
Your work with the First Ladies has actually extended beyond the U.S., and you've also had an opportunity to work with First Ladies globally as well. How are those roles different from what we have here?
Yeah, it's a great question, and actually that has been, one of the fun parts about traveling all over the world with Laura Bush is you get to meet a lot of your counterparts, and some of them are male counterparts in some countries, but by and large, in the majority, your peers are female. And we did so much travel to Africa, as you know, with the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS relief. Laura Bush was really the face of that initiative for the president. And we went to 15 different countries, I think, over 5 trips. So we met with a lot of her counterparts. And they're so eager to be involved in the work of their country. They want to be a partner to their leader as well. And they are important to the work that's going on, and certainly was important partnership for us in the United States to be able to work so directly with the leaders of a country on this incredible life-saving initiative. So anyway, but the difference for all of them was they don't really have the large infrastructure around them like our First Ladies do, are very blessed. Even though it's not a codified position, there is, in the White House Personnel Authority, there are assets of a staff assigned to the First Lady. That's not really the case anywhere else. I was approached also after leaving the White House by the RAND Corporation that does a lot of work extensively around the world, and they had hosted a conference out in Los Angeles on a global health conference, and they brought First Ladies in from Africa, and we did a roundtable with these First Ladies, and it was myself and Milan Verveer, who had been the chief of staff to Hillary Clinton. And what came out of that roundtable discussion about how First Ladies can be so actively involved was a recognition by RAND that there's something here to helping these women build an infrastructure, build a staff structure, prioritize how they can spend their time. So they asked me if I'd be interested in that. And I said, sure, I can help do that. So we developed the African First Ladies Initiative for RAND. It was a 3-year sort of pilot. And it was something of great interest to the Bush Institute, actually. And they have taken and run with that for developing a First Ladies initiative there that I'm also an advisor to that works with First Ladies around the world.
Why is that so important from a national security standpoint,
Sure.
for example?
That's a great connection to make to this because, again, there is so much that comes to the desk of the leader of a country, and certainly in our country to the president, and that they need allies and they need people that they can count on to help be a partner in their work. So in the case of, certainly in Africa and the PEPFAR initiative, what was so fundamental there and why the first ladies there wanted to be so involved, because they feel like they were the mothers of their country. And in fact, some of them actually said that. And if your children, quote unquote, are not healthy or don't have an education, then they can't be, functioning members of society. They agreed. And as, President Bush had said, if they are marginalized, then they are targets to being, co-opted by forces that then certainly can lead to terrorism. So that is why it's so important to be able to identify the issues for the people in your country that need you to focus on them. And certainly we saw that in the malaria initiative and the PEPFAR initiative, to be a great partner in the development of countries that needed our help. And then because they want to do it on their own. They want to be full functioning, members of society and in the global community, in trade and development and health and in education. They want to be leaders. And so that's one way where I felt Laura Bush was so great in working with her counterparts and finding ways that they can forge together and really be an example of a better life for people in their country.
So your work with Mrs. Bush was not your first job in the White House, as we've touched on. Were you always interested in politics? How did you end up becoming Mrs. Bush's chief of staff?
I never would have expected. I love that you asked this question, because even sometimes I'm still surprised of what I've done and where I've ended up, and who knows what comes next, right? It was a far cry from growing up in Bridgeport, Connecticut, where I'm from. I was never interested in politics. My family was not a political family. My family were all immigrants from Italy. They came as young adults, and then met and married as adults. But my father was from Calabria, Italy. Never rose beyond a third grade education. Was a factory worker his whole life, and came here with one possession, with his trumpet. He was a musician, and that was his great joy in life, was music. My mother came here as a 8-year-old. First time she had seen her father, because he left Italy when my grandmother was pregnant, and it took him all those years to make the money to bring his wife and his daughter over here. Met my dad. They got married. But she died when I was 3 years old of ovarian cancer. So I grew up with my grandparents. And my maternal grandparents. And my father lived right next door, which is typical of, immigrant families and multi-generations all in one house. So we were all together, but they really were there. So I really had a different path in my life. I wanted to go into gerontology. I wanted to go into medicine. I wanted to be a doctor. That I felt was my calling, until I got to college and started taking all the science courses. Let's just say I had all the compassion to be a physician. I just was not that great in chemistry, bio, and physics. 3 fundamental subjects.
Acing bedside manner.
I was acing bedside manner. I would have been very good at that. So I needed to make a complete change. I saw this sign at my college counselor's office of a new program to Italy. And I said, well, I'm going to try that. And, I felt that was something that I had always wanted to see, where my family had come from. And so I signed up for that, and I was accepted into the program. I spent my junior year abroad. Just happened to be a really pivotal year. It was 1979, when the American hostages were taken in Iran. And that was a life-changing moment for me. I went to an Italian university in Florence. There were a lot of foreign students from all over the world, mostly Europe, but some also from the Middle East. And the reaction of the foreign students to this taking of American hostages shocked me and actually made me really mad, because they were celebrating it. This was a period of time where communism was in Italy. There were a lot of fun, fundamentalists and activist groups, particularly amongst young people. And so that reaction really shocked me because remember, I grew up in a family who left their country, their home country, because they were poverty stricken and they felt the United States gave them everything. So I grew up in a very patriotic family, but not political. But that experience in 1979, when I came back home, then in 1980, was the height of the presidential campaign. Connecticut is a liberal state. Certainly, UConn, the campus, was not a bastion of Reaganism, that's for sure. But I went and I gathered a couple of other friends. We went and worked the phone banks and were volunteers. It was really the old-fashioned way. I mean, you're knocking on doors and you're calling people, and I really loved it. And then, of course, Ronald Reagan won. And so I was inspired by that. Now, I wanted to move to Washington, but like every young Republican who wanted to come here, I didn't have the skills or the network. But I also had to finish school. I was 12 credits short because of my pre-med experience. So I moved down here and I went to American University. I got my final 12 credits here, did an internship at the Department of Commerce. I volunteered at the RNC, and I slowly started just building my network in politics. So I volunteered in the Reagan-Bush 84 campaign here in Washington. And that was the big difference because now I was in the national headquarters. I met a lot of people, and I was offered a job in the White House a week after the re-election. And it was the lowliest of jobs, Laura, but it was one of the best jobs I ever had. I was reading Ronald Reagan's mail. I was a mail analyst, and you had to be trained how to read the mail. And the woman who trained me had been hired in 1945 in the last months of Franklin Delano Roosevelt. It was mostly a career operation in that office, and there were a few young political people like me. But I got to put together the sample of mail that Ronald Reagan would take to Camp David in the weekends and that he would respond to as both pro and con. And what that really taught me is for any elected official, the further and further you get removed from the people who elected you, this is the one way that they really can stay connected to what people are thinking and how they're feeling or how they may be hurting or how they're worried about or happy about what you're doing as their leader. So I loved that job, and I kept moving up in correspondence and then into other functions of White House operations, including personnel. Mm-hmm. I had that opportunity in White House personnel for 5 years, which was a long stretch, but it also allowed me to work on 2 presidential transitions, and that's where I really, really learned a lot.
I know you've written about the fact that you almost, or I think you sort of questioned whether or not you should take the job working for former First Lady Laura Bush. Talk about sort of what that experience was like and why you hesitated for a moment.
George Bush won the re-election in November of 2004, and I got a call a week later from Laura Bush's then chief of staff, Andy Ball, who had come with her from Texas and had told Laura Bush, if President Bush wins re-election, I am going to go back home. Andy had called me and said, Mrs. Bush would like to talk to you about being her chief of staff. Well, I was so floored, excited, but sort of nervous all at the same time. I actually dropped my cell phone. I was in carpool line picking up the kids at school. And I dropped my cell phone and I picked it back up and I said, Andy, I'm so honored to get this call. Can I call you back in 24 hours? Because Tim, at this point, was traveling in Argentina. He was traveling all the time. I knew instinctively with that call what it would mean for our family life, a job like that. White House is just 24 hours a day. You have to be prepared for that. As exciting as it is, and knew it would be some travel, knew that Tim is traveling so much, and we had 2 little kids, and how would this work? So I called Tim in Buenos Aires, and for his guidance was the best, and I'll always remember it. He said 2 things. 1, you can't say no to a job you haven't been offered, and 2, if you were lucky enough to get this job, we will figure it out. So absolutely, you should go for it and go for the interview. And that gave me all the sort of confidence that I needed, but removed all the pressure that I had felt was working against me to even consider the job. It turned out to be a great meeting with her. She set out her 3 priorities right away. The first was saying, I want to go to Afghanistan. I thought, wow, this is really going to be a different First Lady's office, for sure. And that I felt, and I started to tell her ways that I felt that she could do it, knowing my experience now being at state. The U.S. Afghan Women's Council made an annual trip there every year, and she could easily slip into that. And so we talked about that. And then her other priorities as well. So a week later, I left thinking, wow, even if I didn't get the job, that was such a great experience. And I think Laura Bush was comfortable with me too, because she knew of me by extension because of Tim, because he had been 5 years with their family as her father-in-law's personal aide and knew the level of loyalty and discretion that he had had. And I think she felt I had those same skills and certainly would have the support from someone like Tim to be able to do the job and all the demands that come with it. It turned out to be great. Capstone of my career. Yeah. Absolutely.
What advice would you have for your younger self? What do you wish you had known when you were just starting out?
That is a great question. I think that if I could go back, I wish I would be less worried about making a mistake than at least just trying to do it. And I think we know, and we're so much more in tune with that, the fear of failure now, that failure's not a bad thing. It means you tried. I think that fear of failure was something that, again, was sort of overriding. I was young and didn't want to disappoint anybody around me, particularly, my family, and didn't want anyone to think I couldn't succeed at something.
Anita, what do you do when your confidence is feeling low?
Yeah.
What do you do to build your own confidence so that you can keep going?
I mentor a group of girls, of young women who, work on the Hill. And sometimes I get more energy from being with them, hearing what they're doing, or when they ask me questions, I'm sort of reminded like, okay, then I do have something to offer them. So sometimes it's being around other, people that find in me that they need my help. And that helps me get more confidence that my experience or my time here in Washington or my experience as a mother or anything that I may be engaged in actually has value and can help, other people. I think being around people that give me energy, like you, Laura.
Thank you.
Always just brightens my day. Being around people that, really think that your time and you are worthwhile and they want to talk to you or spend time with you, that is really helpful. And you say how lucky we really are. Things aren't always perfect every day, but there's so many good people, sort of in your life that just help you to feel energized and inspired, and that you are, doing things that make a difference.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. As you know, we ask each of our guests for one piece of advice or life hack, either a mantra that they live by or advice that they consistently give to others. What is yours?
This is something timeless I'm going to offer to you. It's just live by the golden rule. Treat others the way you want to be treated. It's really fundamental to every human interaction that we have. And sometimes it gets tough, particularly in a world like this that we live in, and you're so bombarded with so many things that can be negative. But you know what? People really do respond to someone being kind to them. And I think not only does it make your career more fulfilling, but it makes your life more pleasant.
Anita, thank you so much.
Thank
you so
you,
much.
Laura. You're incredible. Thank you for doing
you.
these podcasts. I listen to them all. I learn something from someone every single day.
Good. I'm so glad.
Thank you.
Thank you again. It's wonderful to have
Thanks.
you. To learn more about Anita, please visit our website at www.shesaidshesaidpodcast.com. There we will post some photos, some additional notes from our visit, as well as Anita's bio. And if you're enjoying She Said, please leave us a review. We would love to hear from you. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Thanks again for listening.